we've spoken about returning from trips and how to maintain a sense of group connectedness and connectedness to the Spirit and to the Spirit's working. How can that be modeled in a really positive way? It's almost impossible, right, to maintain that openness of spirit, that liminality, right? Mm-hmm. But how can it be maintained as much as possible?
You know, I think the aspiration and the reality were both reflected at the Transfiguration. Mm. You get Peter, James, and John following Jesus up the hill, and all the circuits are blown by seeing Jesus, prophet, Moses together, Shekinah, shining. And Peter's first instinct is, this is awesome. We need to make this permanent. And we're going to build little huts so you guys can live here.
Sure.
And
the
voice says, yeah, forget it.
Yeah.
And they're gone.
Yeah.
And the question is, oh, gosh, is it so evanescent? Is the spiritual encounter and the communion and the transcendence so fragmentary? And to some extent, the answer is yes. Yeah. But that does not mean it's not eternally significant, because Peter may have descended from the high mountain of the Transfiguration without the Shekinah and the shining of Jesus and the aura around him, but he was changed forever. Yeah. And he was changed forever in part because of the remembrance and in part because of the anticipation of the possibility. Mm-hmm. So if you now work from that into the mission trip, the retreat, if you have been blessed with frankly, it's a spiritual gift of this spiritual openness and communion and transcendence, yeah, you will have to come down from the mountaintop. Yeah. But you will be forever changed by the remembrance of what happened. And now, in terms of the actual question you asked, how can the remembrance, the beauty, the catharsis prompt an openness and a search to the re-experience? Mm-hmm. And it would be a species of works righteousness to write a script. Here's how you'll reenact it so it happens exactly again. Yep. And to some extent, we're doing that every time we do a communion, right? Mm-hmm. There is a power at the Last Supper where everyone had this sense of the presence of God. Mm-hmm. And every time we do communion, we're hoping we might re-experience that transcendent presence of Christ.
And yet the Spirit blows where it will, right?
And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't,
God's
right?
Thing in certain moments
right.
and not in others.
So in your youth group, coming back to vulnerable Vesper discussions in your small groups, coming back to youth-led worship that's beautiful and moving and opens to the possibility of the transcendent, reenacting a service day or a facilitated experience that's similar to the trip, all these at least potentiate the continuation of the revisiting of the liminal space. Sometimes they will, because that's the way the Spirit bloweth where it will, and sometimes they won't. And that requires a little helping the youth understand it's not a failure if it doesn't. Yeah. We shared something beautiful and we will again. And at a minimum, by encouraging testimony, which I think is really critical. Testimony is such an underappreciated practice in certainly mainline and progressive churches today. By nurturing the prospect of testimony, it grounds their recollection and their experience. It shares that experience with others who may not have been there, and it creates a real sense of anticipation for the next possibility. Certainly the next mission trip. Certainly part of the power of any given annual retreat that gets a resonance with the youth group, whether it's a short-term or long-term, is I remember last year's. Remember last year's where? And that creates this potential anticipation that it is part of the openness to the Spirit we actually can't control.
Sure.